The chapel was so quiet I could hear the whispers of my own heartbeat. Not a single teardrop fell as Patricia Hayes lay in her polished mahogany coffin, her face set in that familiar stern expression, even in death. The woman who had tormented me for 8 years was finally silenced, yet her presence still suffocated the room. I glanced around at the faces of the Hayes family, stone cold, bitter, too proud to show genuine emotion even now. My husband Stephen sat beside me, his jaw clenched, staring straight ahead as if he could see through the stained glass windows to some escape beyond. His sister Victoria dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief, putting on a performance for the select crowd of Dallas elite who had bothered to attend. Nobody loved Patricia, but everyone feared her. I smoothed my black dress, purchased specifically for this occasion at a price that would have made my middle-class parents gasp, and tried to still the trembling in my hands. What I was about to do felt impossible, yet I had promised. One last act of submission to the woman who had made it her mission to break me. "And now," the minister announced, his voice echoing through the chapel, "Patricia's daughter-in-law, Lauren Hayes, would like to say a few words." The rustling of expensive fabrics filled the silence as heads turned toward me. I could feel Victoria's eyes burning into my profile, her perpetual disapproval radiating across the pew. Stephen's hand briefly touched mine, the first genuine gesture from him in months, before quickly retreating. My legs felt like water as I stood and made my way to the pulpit. The note cards in my hand were unnecessary. I had rehearsed this speech for days, knowing it would be the performance of my lifetime. I looked out at the sea of faces, business associates, social acquaintances, the people who had witnessed my humiliation at Patricia's hands time and again, and somehow found my voice. "Patricia Hayes," I began, my Texas accent carefully muted. After years of Patricia's corrections, was a woman of remarkable strength and vision. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. She welcomed me into the Hayes family with grace and taught me the meaning of resilience. From the third row, I caught the slight raise of an eyebrow from David Kaplan, Patricia's longtime lawyer. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, what Patricia had really been like. Her dedication to family traditions, I continued, feeling sweat forming at my temples. Her unwavering standards and her commitment to excellence shaped not just her children, but everyone fortunate enough to enter her orbit. The chapel remained deathly silent. Not a single nod of agreement, not a murmur of affirmation. They all knew I was lying. Patricia had been cruel, controlling, manipulative. A woman who derived pleasure from finding others' weaknesses and exploiting them mercilessly. Yet here I stood, extolling her virtues, painting her as a maternal saint rather than the monster who had called me common at my wedding reception and inadequate at every family gathering since. "In her final months," I said, my voice growing steadier with each fabricated sentiment, "I came to understand Patricia's wisdom on a deeper level. Her insistence on proper appearances wasn't vanity, it was pride. Her exacting standards weren't cruelty, they were excellence. And her tests of character weren't meant to break us, but to forge us into something stronger." As I spoke these words Patricia herself had commanded me to say in one of our final private conversations, I noticed something shift in the room. A tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. Victoria's posture had stiffened. Stephen's brother-in-law leaned forward slightly, and Stephen himself had gone completely still, his eyes now fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read. "Patricia once told me," I concluded, the final lie the most audacious of all, that her greatest joy was seeing her family, united in strength and purpose. Though she leaves us physically, her spirit of resilience and dignity will continue to guide the Hayes family for generations to come. I stepped away from the pulpit, my legs somehow carrying me back to my seat despite feeling nothing below my waist. The silence that followed was absolute, a collective held breath, as if the entire congregation was waiting for someone to call out the charade. But no one did. As I sank back into the pew, David Kaplan leaned toward me from the row behind. His breath was warm against my ear as he whispered, "Congratulations, Lauren. You just passed her final test." My blood ran cold. Beside me, Stephen's face drained of color. "What?" I whispered back, but David had already straightened, his face returning to its professional mask. The remainder of the service passed in a blur. The minister's closing words, the recorded violin piece Patricia had selected, the slow procession past the coffin, all of it felt distant, as if I were watching it happen to someone else. It wasn't until we gathered in the antechamber of the Hayes family mausoleum that reality snapped back into focus. David Kaplan stood at the center of our small group, holding a leather portfolio. As per Mrs. Hayes's instructions, he announced, the reading of the will is to take place immediately following the service, before any of you leave the premises. Victoria let out a sharp laugh. Of course, one last command performance. She turned to her husband, muttering, as if we don't all know what's coming. But something in David's expression, a certain tightness around his eyes, made me think otherwise. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't what the Hayes family expected. Stephen's hand found mine, squeezing with uncharacteristic anxiety. When I looked up at him, the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew something I didn't. If everyone would follow me to the estate, David continued, we can proceed with the reading in Mrs. Hayes's study, as she requested. As we filed out toward our cars, Victoria brushed past me, her expensive perfume engulfing me in a cloud. Quite the eulogy, Lauren, she hissed. Did you practice it in front of the mirror, or does lying come naturally to you? Before I could respond, Stephen stepped between us. Not now, Victoria. Oh, defending her now? Victoria's perfect eyebrows arched. Interesting timing, brother. The drive to the Hayes estate was silent, the tension between Stephen and me thick enough to cut. The sprawling mansion that had never felt like home loomed ahead, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon Texas sun like a challenge. As we pulled through the gates, Stephen finally spoke. Lauren, whatever happens in there, don't. I cut him off. Just don't. I didn't want his explanations or excuses. Not now. Not after everything. What I couldn't possibly know then, as we walked into Patricia's domain one last time, was that the true performance was just beginning, and that after 8 years of humiliation and heartbreak, the curtain was about to rise on an ending no one, least of all me, could have scripted. The Hayes estate had always felt more like a museum than a home. Meticulously decorated rooms where nothing was meant to be touched. Pristine gardens designed to be viewed rather than enjoyed. I followed the somber procession through the grand foyer, my heels clicking against marble that seemed to amplify every step, every heartbeat. Patricia's study was at the heart of the house, a room I'd rarely been permitted to enter. Rich mahogany. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes I doubted anyone had read. The massive desk where she'd conducted both business and family matters dominated the space, imposing even in her absence. David Kaplan positioned himself behind it, arranging papers with deliberate care while the family settled into the chairs arranged in a semicircle. I took a seat at the edge, as had become my habit over the years. Present but peripheral, seen but not heard. Before we begin, David said, his voice carrying the precise tone of a man who had delivered difficult news countless times. Mrs. Hayes recorded a message to be played at this moment. He produced a small digital recorder from his pocket and placed it on the desk. Patricia's voice filled the room, causing an involuntary shiver down my spine. Even from beyond the grave, her clipped, aristocratic Texas drawl commanded attention. If you're hearing this, I've finally departed this world, no doubt to mixed reviews. A cold chuckle followed. I've spent my life building and protecting the Hayes legacy. Some of you understood that mission. Others awaited pause. Others proved disappointing. Stephen shifted in, his seat beside me. His sister Victoria exchanged glances with her husband. I wasn't born into wealth, Patricia's voice continued. I married into it, and then multiplied it through discipline and sacrifice. The Hayes name meant nothing before I took it. Remember that. I felt a strange kinship with the dead woman in that moment. We'd both been outsiders to this family once. My will may surprise. You. Good. I've never been predictable, and I don't intend to start in death. David, proceed. The recorder clicked off. David cleared his throat and opened a sealed envelope. I, Patricia Eleanor Hayes, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, he read, his voice steady and professional. The standard legal preamble continued, but I barely heard it. My mind was stuck on Patricia's recorded words, the admission that she, too, had married into the Hayes fortune. In 8 years, she'd never once acknowledged that we shared that experience. To my daughter, Victoria Hayes Montgomery, David continued, I leave my personal jewelry collection, with the exception of items specifically designated below, and a trust fund in the amount of $1 million. Victoria's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. $1 million was a pittance by Hayes standards, barely enough to maintain her lifestyle for a few years. Victoria, David read Patricia's personal message. You inherited my eye for beauty, but not my understanding of its cost. Perhaps limitation will teach you what I could not. Victoria's face flushed crimson. Her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm as she opened her mouth to protest. To my son-in-law, James Montgomery, I leave nothing. Your marriage to my daughter was transaction enough. James's face hardened, but he remained silent. To my son, Stephen Hayes, David continued, and I felt Stephen tense beside me. I leave my shares in Hayes Technology Solutions with the stipulation that they be placed in a managed trust for a period of 5 years, during which time he will receive the dividends but cannot sell or transfer ownership. Stephen leaned forward. That's it? Just the company shares? His voice cracked slightly. David continued reading without acknowledging the interruption. Stephen, you always wanted control without responsibility. Now you have income without control. Perhaps, in 5 years, you'll have learned the difference between entitlement and earning. The study fell into stunned silence. I stared at my hands, unable to look at my husband's face. The Hayes family fortune was substantial. The estate alone was worth millions, not to mention Patricia's investment portfolio, the vacation properties, the art collection. Yet she'd barely distributed any of it so far. And finally, David's voice seemed to gain strength as he reached the final section. To my daughter-in-law, Lauren Hayes, I leave the remainder of my estate, including this residence, my personal effects not otherwise designated, all remaining financial assets, and my controlling interest in the Hayes Foundation. The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't have heard correctly. My head snapped up to find David looking directly at me, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That's impossible, Victoria spat, rising from her chair. She can't. You can't. She turned to me, eyes flashing. What did you do? How did you manipulate her? Vicky, please, her husband murmured, attempting to pull her back to her seat. There's a personal message, David continued, unperturbed by the outburst. Lauren, you endured years of my testing. I pushed you to your limits because I needed to know if you possessed what the others lacked. Genuine dignity. When you cared for me in my final months without complaint, when you showed grace under constant pressure, you proved yourself worthy of what I built. The others were born to the Hayes name. You earned it. Don't waste. Edward, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to be spinning slowly around me. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. A final test of Patricia's design. Stephen turned to me, his face a mask of shock and something darker. Betrayal, as if I had somehow engineered this outcome. There are, of course, additional legal details to discuss, David continued, but those are the primary provisions of Mrs. Hayes' will. This is absurd, Stephen finally found his voice. Mother was not in her right mind. We'll contest it. David's expression didn't change. I would strongly advise against that course of action, Stephen. Your mother anticipated that response. The will was updated 6 months ago, after extensive psychological evaluation. Additionally, there's a no contest clause. Should any beneficiary challenge the will, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, tears of rage streaming down her face. This is your doing, she hissed at me. You manipulated a sick, old woman. I didn't know, I whispered, the words barely audible even to myself. I had no idea. But as the initial shock began to recede, fragments started connecting in my mind. Patricia's strange comments in her final months, her insistence that I be the one to care for her, the private conversations where she seemed to be evaluating me rather than tormenting me. There's one more thing, David said, reaching into his portfolio again. He withdrew a sealed envelope and extended it toward me. Mrs. Hayes asked that this be given to you privately, Lauren. The rest of you are free to go. My office will be in touch regarding the formal transfer of assets. As if in a trance, I accepted the envelope. It felt heavy, despite containing only paper. Stephen stood abruptly. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and urgent. Now. I looked up at the husband who had stood silent through years of his mother's cruelty, who had chosen convenience over loyalty, whose recent late nights and weekend business trips had told their own story. No, I said quietly, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. I don't think we do. As the Hayes family filed out of the study, Victoria still seething, Stephen looking back at me with a mixture of anger and desperation, I remained seated, the weight of Patricia's letter in my hands feeling somehow heavier than the entire fortune she had just bequeathed to me. Whatever game Patricia Hayes had been playing, I was apparently the only winner. But as I sat alone in the study of a woman who had made my life miserable for nearly a decade, victory felt nothing like I had imagined. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it contained more than just paper, perhaps the weight of truth itself. The house had fallen quiet, the angry echoes of the Hayes family fading as they retreated to process their collective shock. Only David remained, standing by the study door with a patience that suggested he knew more than he'd revealed. "Would you like privacy?" he asked, his professional demeanor softening slightly. I nodded, unable to form words. As he stepped out and closed the door behind him, I found myself truly alone in Patricia's inner sanctum for the first time. The massive portrait of her that hung behind the desk seemed to watch me, those calculating eyes following as I carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Patricia's personal stationery, cream-colored, thick, with her initials embossed in gold. Her handwriting was as precise and unyielding as she had been in life. "Lauren, if you're reading this, you've surprised them all. Good, you've surprised me too, which few have managed to do in my lifetime. When Stephen first brought you home, this Texas shop girl with her community college degree and department store clothes, I saw what he didn't, a spine of steel beneath your accommodating smile. He thought he'd found someone malleable. I recognized a survivor. I've been cruel to you. Deliberately, methodically cruel. Not out of hatred, though I let you believe that, but because I needed to know if you possessed what this family has lost. Integrity under fire. Stephen is weak. Victoria is bitter. Both inherited money, but neither inherited character. They won't survive what's coming. 3 months ago, I discovered irregularities in the Hayes technology accounts. Stephen has been siphoning company funds through a network of shell corporations for years. The company is facing federal investigation. Victoria has known and helped cover his tracks in exchange for financing her lifestyle. The evidence is in the safe behind my portrait. The combination is your birthday, the only date Stephen might never guess. I'm leaving you everything because you're the only one strong, enough to weather the storm that's coming. The only one who might preserve something of what I built from the ashes of my children's foolishness. The world will tell you I was a monster. Perhaps I was. But monsters survive, Lauren. And now so will you. Patricia Hayes, P.S. Stephen has been sleeping with his assistant for over a year. I have proof of this as well. A woman should know exactly who she's dealing with. I read the letter twice, then a third time, each word slicing through the fog of shock that had enveloped me since the will reading. The revelation about Stephen didn't surprise me. I'd suspected as much for months. But the extent of his deception, the involvement of Victoria, the looming legal disaster, these hit me like physical blows. Slowly I rose and approached the portrait. It seemed almost sacrilegious to touch it, to disturb the image of the woman who had dominated this house for decades. But with trembling hands, I eased it away from the wall, revealing a small wall safe just as Patricia had described. I dialed in my birthday, a date Patricia had never acknowledged in 8 years of marriage to her son, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism, releasing. Inside was a USB drive labeled simply Evidence, and a thick folder of financial documents. Beneath these lay a smaller envelope containing photographs, images of Stephen and his young assistant in intimate embraces, date stamped consistently over the past year. The most recent was taken just 2 weeks before Patricia's death. The safe also contained a second letter, this one addressed to David Kaplan. I set it aside, knowing it wasn't mine to read, and carefully returned the evidence to the safe. I would need time to process this, to decide my next move. The door opened softly, and David reappeared. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "The company is in trouble," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Stephen has been embezzling?" David nodded. "Mrs. Hayes confided in me about her suspicions shortly before updating her will. I've been quietly preparing for the fallout." "Did she tell you everything about what Stephen's been doing, about his—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Mrs. Hayes was thorough in her documentation," he replied diplomatically, "but she believed you were the only one who could salvage the situation. She admired your resilience, Lauren, more than you know." I laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound. She had a funny way of showing admiration. "Patricia Hayes didn't know how to love people," David said, his voice tinged with what sounded almost like affection. "But she knew how to recognize value, and she valued you above her own children in the end." I handed him the letter, addressed to him from the safe. "She left this for you." He accepted it with a nod of thanks. "What will you do now, Mrs. Hayes?" The question hung in the air between us. What would I do? In the span of a few hours, I had gone from the family outsider to the heir of everything Patricia had built. I had discovered my husband's betrayal was far deeper than I had suspected. I had learned that the woman who had tormented me had, in her twisted way, been grooming me to take her place. I need time, I said finally. And space. Of course. The guest house is prepared if you'd prefer not to stay in the main residence tonight. Patricia had thought of everything, it seemed. Thank you. I think I'd like to be alone for a while. David nodded and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. For what it's worth, Mrs. Hayes, she was right about you. You do have something the others lack. After he left, I remained in Patricia's study for a long time, absorbing the reality of my new situation. 8 years of enduring Patricia's cruelty, of walking on eggshells in my own marriage, of doubting my worth at every turn. And now I held the power to reshape not just my future, but the future of the entire Hayes legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had spent years trying to mold me into her image of what a Hayes woman should be. She had critiqued my clothes, my speech, my background. She had made me feel small at every opportunity. And yet, in death, she had elevated me above all others. As twilight descended over the estate, I made my way to the guest house, a modest, 3-bedroom cottage set apart from the main mansion, surrounded by gardens Patricia had designed herself. It had always been my favorite part of the property, though I'd rarely been allowed to use it. I stepped inside to find my suitcase already there, along with a bottle of expensive wine and a single glass. Another of Patricia's arrangements, no doubt. I poured myself a generous measure and stepped out onto the small patio, watching as lights began to glow in the main house windows. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I'd left the study. Texts from Stephen ranging from angry demands to wounded pleas, voicemails from Victoria, her rage barely contained. I silenced them all and watched as the Texas sky deepened to indigo, stars emerging one by one. Tomorrow would bring decisions, legal consultations, confrontations, most likely. But tonight, in this moment of suspended reality, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Patricia Hayes had tested me, tormented me, and finally, inexplicably, trusted me. Whether out of genuine recognition of my worth or simply to spite her own children, she had handed me both a fortune and a crisis. As I raised my glass to the darkening sky, I couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere, Patricia was watching, and if she was, whether she was smiling at the chaos she had left behind or waiting to see if I would pass this final, most daunting test of all. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity of Texas sunlight, streaming through the guest house windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the quiet air. For a moment, before full consciousness returned, I felt a strange peace. Then reality crashed back, bringing with it the weight of yesterday's revelations. I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Stephen had progressed from anger to bargaining overnight, his final message sent at 3:42 a.m. "We can fix this together. Don't do anything until we talk. Please." There was also a text from David Kaplan. "Available when you're ready. Take your time." I showered and dressed carefully, selecting a simple black dress from my limited wardrobe, one of the few items Patricia had ever complimented, noting with surprise that it actually suited my coloring. Small victories had been rare enough in this house that I remembered each one. The main house was quiet. When I entered through the kitchen door, Maria, the housekeeper who had worked for Patricia for 2 decades, was at the counter preparing coffee. She turned as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," she said, the formality new and strange between us. Yesterday I had been Miss Lauren, the daughter-in-law who ranked below the family pets in the household hierarchy. "Just, Lauren, please, Maria. Nothing has changed." She gave me a knowing look that said everything had changed, then poured me coffee in one of Patricia's bone china cups. "Mr. Stephen left early. He said to tell you he'd be back by noon." I nodded my thanks and took the coffee to the sunroom, another space that had been largely off-limits to me. The morning paper lay folded on the table, Patricia's reading glasses still beside it as if waiting for her return. The headline caught my eye: "Hayes Technology Shares Dip Amid Rumors of Federal Probe." So it was beginning already. Patricia's letter hadn't exaggerated the danger. I was halfway through the article when I heard the front door open and close with deliberate force. Victoria's voice carried through the house before she appeared, heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "Where is she?" I heard her demand, presumably of Maria. "Never mind, I'll find her myself." She appeared in the sunroom doorway moments later, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, her face flushed with anger. "Comfortable in your new kingdom?" she spat, eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of me with Patricia's china cup in the sunroom. "Didn't take you long to settle in." I set the cup down carefully. "Good morning, Victoria." "Don't good morning me." "What did you do to manipulate my mother? What did you say to her?" "Nothing she didn't see for herself," I replied, surprising myself with my calm. "I never asked for any of this." "Oh, please." Victoria stalked into the room, her expensive, perfume overwhelming the space. 8 years of playing the perfect suffering daughter-in-law, the patient caretaker, all while waiting for your moment. Is that really what you think of me? After all this time? "I think you're smarter than you pretend to be," she said, her voice dropping dangerously. "And I think you're in way over your head. Do you have any idea what you've inherited? The company is teetering on disaster. The foundation has commitments to meet. There are expectations, responsibilities." "I know about the federal investigation," I interrupted, watching her face carefully. "I know about Stephen's embezzlement. And I know you helped cover it up." The color drained from Victoria's face. For the first time in our long acquaintance, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "You're bluffing," she whispered. "Your mother kept meticulous records," I said, rising from my seat to face her directly. "She knew everything, Victoria, about the shell companies, about the diverted funds, about your involvement. She left me all the evidence." Victoria sank into the nearest chair, her composure cracking. She couldn't have known. But she did, and now I do too." Victoria's shock quickly hardened back to anger. "So what's your play here? Blackmail? You'll keep quiet if we don't contest the will? Is that it?" I shook my head. "I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. But I want you to understand something, Victoria. I never wanted your mother's money. I never plotted against any of you. I just wanted a family that accepted me." Victoria laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, how noble. St. Lauren, suffering in silence all these years. Well, guess what? Family isn't what you think it is. Not at this level. It's business. It's always been business. Maybe for you," I replied softly. "It didn't have to be." Something flickered across Victoria's face. Regret, perhaps, or a flash of recognition. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "You won't last a week," she said, rising again. "You don't have what it takes to handle this family's affairs. When it all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "One more thing. Stephen will try to charm his way back into your good graces. He'll promise change, beg forgiveness, swear he can explain everything. Don't believe him. He's more like our mother than either of us ever admitted. He'll use anyone to get what he wants. Even you. Especially you." With that parting shot, she was gone, leaving me alone with cold coffee and colder revelations. It was the closest Victoria had ever come to showing concern for my well-being, wrapped though it was in hostility and resentment. I returned to the study, drawn back to the epicenter of yesterday's earthquake. In the morning light, it looked less intimidating. Just a room filled with books and furniture. The trappings of power without the woman who had wielded it so effectively. Patricia's desk calendar still showed appointments for the coming month. Her monogrammed pen set lay arranged at perfect angles. Everything in its proper place, just as she had demanded in life. I ran my fingers lightly over the polished surface, wondering how many decisions had been made here, how many lives shaped or broken by the woman who had sat behind it. The portrait seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. I approached it again, studying Patricia's face with new perspective. She had been beautiful once, in a severe, uncompromising way. Looking closely, I could see hints of Stephen in her. Features, the same jawline, the same slight asymmetry to the eyes. I had never noticed the resemblance before. The safe behind the portrait still held its damning contents. Evidence that could destroy Stephen's future, implicate Victoria, potentially bring down the company Patricia had built. The power to ruin lives now rested in my hands that Patricia had deemed worthy when her own children had failed her. As I closed the safe and returned the portrait to its place, I heard the front door open again. Heavier footsteps this time. Stephen. I remained where I stood, watching the study door, waiting for the confrontation that had been building for longer than I cared to admit. When Stephen appeared, he looked terrible. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "Lauren," he said, my name almost a plea on his lips. We need to talk. Yes, I agreed, surprised again by the steadiness in my voice. I believe we do. Stephen stood in the doorway of Patricia's study, a stranger wearing my husband's face. The confident, charming man I'd married had vanished, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, his gaze lingering on his mother's portrait. You shouldn't be in here, he said, the words automatic, reflexive, as if his mother's rules still governed the house. It's my study now, Stephen. The words felt foreign in my mouth, yet undeniably true. Everything in this house is mine now. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Lauren, please, you don't understand what's happening. Don't I? I moved behind Patricia's desk, drawing strength from the position. Your mother left me a letter, Stephen, and evidence. His face drained of color. What evidence? Bank transfers, corporate documents, photographs. I let the last word hang in the air between us. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by shame, then calculation. I'd seen that progression before, whenever he was caught in now. A lie? He moved through these stages before arriving at whatever strategy he thought would work best. Lauren, he began, his voice softening as he took a step toward me. I know how this looks, but there are explanations for everything. I'm sure there are. I remained where I stood. Explain the embezzlement, Stephen. Explain how you've been stealing from your own family's company for years. He stopped mid-step. That's not... It's complicated. The company needed liquidity for certain operations that couldn't go on the official books. Mother knew about most of it. Did she know about Jessica? I asked, naming his assistant for the first time. Stephen's carefully constructed facade cracked. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, looking suddenly older than his 37 years. That was a mistake, he said finally. A stupid, meaningless mistake. A year-long mistake, I corrected him. While I was taking care of your dying mother, while I was trying to save our marriage. I was under pressure, he said, his voice rising. Mother was getting suspicious about the finances. The company was in trouble. You were always busy with her. Don't you dare! I cut him off, my voice sharp as glass. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. Stephen moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself a generous measure of his mother's expensive scotch. His hand trembled slightly as he raised the glass to his lips. What are you going to do? He asked after a long moment, not meeting my eyes. About the company? About us? It was the question I'd been asking myself since yesterday. What would I do with this unexpected power? This unwanted responsibility? This broken marriage? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I do know I can't trust you, Stephen. I haven't been able to trust you for a long time. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer. The company is in trouble, Lauren. Real trouble. If the feds get hold of those documents, it's over. Not just for me, for everyone. Hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. The Hayes name will be ruined. You should have thought of that before you started stealing. It wasn't stealing, he insisted, a flash of the old arrogance returning. It was creative accounting. Everyone does it at this level. Is that what you told yourself? Is that how you justified it? He drained his glass, setting it down with more force than necessary. What I did for the company was necessary. What happened with Jessica was a weakness. I'm not proud of either, but I'm asking you, begging you, to help me fix this. How exactly would we fix this, Stephen? I asked, genuinely curious about what scheme he might propose. We could return the funds. Quietly. Make it look like an accounting error. David knows. People at the SEC who could help smooth things over. Mother had the connections to make this disappear, and now you have them. I studied my husband's face, searching for some sign of the man I'd fallen in love with years ago. The earnest graduate student who'd talked about changing the world through technology, who'd promised we'd build something meaningful together. When had he become this person, willing to break laws, betray vows, and expect the world to bend to accommodate his failures? And what about us? I asked softly. How do we fix that? Stephen approached the desk, his expression softening into the boyish vulnerability that had once made my heart race. We start over. Clean slate. I'll get rid of Jessica. I'll be the husband you deserve. We can use Mother's money to rebuild everything. Better than before. Use Mother's money. Not rebuild our trust. Not heal our marriage. Use Mother's money. There is no starting over, Stephen, I said, the truth of it settling into my bones as I spoke. There's only moving forward. And I don't think we're moving in the same direction anymore. You can't be serious. His vulnerability vanished, replaced by disbelief. After everything we've been through, you'd throw away 8 years of marriage? I'm not the one who threw it away, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You did that. One lie, one betrayal at a time. Stephen's face hardened. So that's it? You get everything, the house, the money, the company, and I get nothing? You get exactly what your mother decided you deserved, I said. And maybe that's the problem, Stephen. You've always expected to be given things rather than earning them. His laugh was bitter, almost cruel. That's rich coming from you, the shop girl who just inherited millions by playing nurse to a dying woman. The word stung, but I refused to show it. Is that what you think happened? That I manipulated your mother? What else am I supposed to think? She hated you for years, then suddenly leaves you everything? It doesn't make sense. Maybe she saw something in me that she didn't see in you, I suggested. Integrity, loyalty, strength. Stephen's expression darkened. Don't talk to me about loyalty. You're ready to throw me to the wolves after one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, I interrupted. It was a pattern, a choice you made. Every day, for years. To lie, to cheat, to steal. And I stayed through all of it, Stephen. I stayed when your mother humiliated me at every opportunity. I stayed when you refused to defend me. I stayed even when I suspected you were cheating. I stayed because I believed in our vows, even when you didn't. My words hung in the air between us. For once, Stephen had no clever response, no smooth deflection. I want you to leave, I said finally. Pack what you need for now. You can arrange to collect the rest later. You're kicking me out of my family home? He asked incredulously. It's not your family home anymore, I reminded him. It's mine. And yes, I'm asking you to leave. Stephen stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the house that had never truly felt like home to either of us. I remained in Patricia's, my study, long after the front door slammed. The confrontation had left me drained but strangely calm, as if I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Available when you need me. Take all the time you require. Time. I had that now. Time and resources and freedom I'd never imagined possible. As the afternoon sun slanted through the study windows, casting long shadows across the carpet, I realized Patricia had given me more than just her fortune. She'd given me back myself, the self I'd slowly lost during 8 years of trying to fit into a world that was never designed to accept me. The question remained. What would I do with this unexpected gift? And could I prove worthy of it without becoming as hard and cold as the woman who had bestowed it upon me? The Hayes estate felt impossibly empty that night. Even with Maria and the groundskeeper still present, the vastness of the house seemed to amplify my solitude. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture I'd never been. Permitted to use, examining art I'd never been encouraged to appreciate. The master suite, Patricia's private domain, remained untouched. I couldn't bring myself to cross that threshold yet. Instead, I settled into the guest room I'd always used when staying overnight, the neutral space that had been neither Patricia's territory nor truly mine. Sleep eluded me. My mind raced with questions, possibilities, fears. By dawn, I had made my first decision. David arrived promptly at 9, as requested. We met in the sunroom, where morning light softened the formal furnishings. He looked immaculate as always, his suit perfectly tailored, his manner professional yet warm. I've had some time to think, I began after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I expected you would, he said with a slight smile. Patricia always said you were more thoughtful than you appeared. The comment, like so many revelations about Patricia's true opinions, caught me off guard. She said that? David nodded. She observed everyone carefully. You most of all, especially in the last year. I absorbed this, then returned to my purpose. I want to know everything about the company's situation, the full extent of Stephen's activities, the potential legal ramifications, the options we have. A wise first step, David approved. He opened his briefcase and produced a folder. I've prepared a preliminary overview. The situation is serious, but not necessarily fatal, at least not yet. I accepted the folder, but didn't open it immediately. Before we go further, I need to know something. How much did you know about what Stephen was doing? What Patricia knew? David's expression remained neutral. I became aware of irregularities approximately 8 months ago when Patricia asked me to conduct a discreet investigation. What we found disturbed her deeply. And you didn't report it? To the authorities? My duty was to my client, Patricia. She wanted to handle the matter privately, to protect the company and the family name. She was developing her response when her health began to fail more rapidly than expected. I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. And now? What's your duty now? My duty is to you, Mrs. Hayes. Patricia made that quite clear in her instructions to me. He held my gaze steadily. But I should note that my legal obligation is to uphold the law. There are limits to what I can advise or assist with. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, I assured him. I just need to understand my options. I opened the folder and began reviewing the documents. Financial statements, transaction records, corporate structures so complex they made my head spin. The evidence was damning. Stephen had been siphoning funds through a network of shell companies for nearly 4 years, disguising the transactions as investments or consulting fees. How much? I asked, looking up from the documents. Approximately $12 million, David replied. Not enough to bankrupt the company, but enough to trigger serious consequences if discovered by regulators. The amount stunned me. $12 million stolen while I'd been pinching pennies, feeling guilty about every purchase, living under Patricia's constant scrutiny of my extravagance. And Victoria's involvement? David's expression tightened slightly. She appears to have helped conceal the activities from Patricia, though she may not have been aware of the full extent. She received payments through her interior design firm for consulting services that were never rendered. I closed the folder, needing a moment to process. What would Patricia have done if she had lived longer? David considered the question carefully. Based on our discussions, I believe she was planning to force Stephen out of the company, using the threat of exposure to ensure his cooperation. She was particularly concerned about protecting the Hayes Foundation, which has been her most meaningful legacy. The foundation. I'd almost forgotten about that part of my inheritance. The charitable organization Patricia had established 20 years earlier, which funded educational initiatives for underprivileged women. It was perhaps the only genuinely admirable aspect of Patricia I'd ever glimpsed. Can the foundation be affected by this? I asked. If the scandal becomes public, donations could dry up. The foundation's reputation is closely tied to the Hayes name. I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. Something Patricia had once said to me floated back, a rare moment when her guard had slipped. Money buys freedom, Lauren. Not happiness, not respect, but freedom to choose. Never forget that. I want to protect the foundation, I said, turning back to David. Whatever happens with the company, with Stephen, the foundation's work needs to continue. David nodded, making a note. That can be arranged. We could potentially separate the foundation from the Hayes name if necessary. Good. I took a deep breath. As for the company and the situation Stephen created, I have some ideas. I outlined my thoughts. Not a fully formed plan yet, but the beginning of one. David listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or offering legal context. When I finished, he sat back, a new respect visible in his expression. Patricia was right about you, he said. You do have a remarkable clarity of thought under pressure. I've had plenty of practice, I replied dryly. Years of navigating Patricia's tests tend to sharpen one's decision-making skills. Indeed, he gathered his papers. I'll begin working on these arrangements immediately. In the meantime, you should expect Stephen to make another attempt to persuade you. He won't give up easily. I know. I walked David to the door. Thank you for your help with all of this. I know your loyalty was to Patricia for many years. My loyalty is to my clients, he corrected, gently. Patricia Hayes was a formidable woman, but not always a kind one. I believe she chose her successor wisely. After he left, I returned to the study and approached Patricia's portrait once more. Those piercing eyes seemed to follow me, evaluating my every move, measuring my worth against some invisible standard. I won't become you, I whispered to the painted face. I'll fix what needs fixing, but I won't do it with cruelty. The portrait offered no response, of course, but as I turned away, I felt something shift inside me, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Patricia had wielded power like a weapon. I would try to wield it like a tool, to repair rather than destroy. My phone chimed with a text from Victoria. We need to talk. Neutral ground. The Palmer's charity luncheon. Tomorrow. I'll be at the corner table at 1 p.m. The Palmers, family friends of the Hayes, Dallas aristocracy who hosted a monthly charity luncheon that Patricia had never missed. An invitation to their events was coveted in certain circles, a marker of social standing that Patricia had guarded jealously. Victoria was offering me my first public appearance as the new Mrs. Hayes, a chance to claim my place in the social hierarchy Patricia had dominated for decades. It was also, undoubtedly, a test. Would I know how to behave? Would I embarrass myself? Would I fail where Patricia had always excelled? I texted back a simple response. I'll be there. As I looked through my closet that evening, I realized with dismay that nothing I owned would meet Patricia's exacting standards for such an event. My work clothes from my former life as a retail manager, my casual weekend wear, the handful of dresses deemed acceptable for family functions, none would pass muster at the Palmers' luncheon. For a moment, I considered canceling. Then I remembered the credit cards in my purse. No longer Patricia's cards that I was permitted to use for appropriate purchases, but my cards now. Cards with limits. That reflected my new reality. I made a quick phone call to Neiman Marcus, where a personal shopper I'd once assisted as a sales associate years ago was delighted to help me. Of course, Mrs. Hayes, she said, the new name still strange to my ears. We can have several options ready for you first thing tomorrow. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. Still the same Lauren, with the same green eyes and stubborn chin, the same nervous habit of tucking my hair behind my ear when thinking deeply. But something had changed. Something beyond the material circumstances of my life. For the first time since I'd entered the Hayes family, I was making decisions without seeking anyone's approval, without bracing for criticism or disappointment, without shrinking myself to fit someone else's expectations. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, I realized with startling clarity, exactly what Patricia had intended. The Palmers' charity luncheon was exactly as I remembered from the few times Patricia had permitted me to attend, a sea of designer outfits, careful laughter, and watchful eyes. I stepped into the ballroom of the Crescent Hotel in a navy blue Oscar de B. La Renta dress that the personal shopper had assured me was understated but unmistakably elegant, precisely the impression I wanted to make. The hush that fell across the room when I entered told me everything. News of Patricia's will had spread through Dallas society like wildfire. Every person present knew that the shopgirl from Austin was now the keeper of the Hayes fortune. Victoria was already seated at the corner table, her posture rigid, her eyes tracking my entrance with calculated assessment. I made my way toward her, conscious of the whispers that followed in my wake. "You're late," she said as I took the seat across from her, though I was precisely on time. "It's good to see you too, Victoria." I signaled to a passing waiter for water, a move I'd seen Patricia make countless times. "Thank you for suggesting we meet." She studied me with narrowed eyes. "That's new," she noted, nodding toward my dress. Mother would have approved. Coming from Victoria, this was as close to a compliment as I was likely to get. I accepted it with a slight nod. "I assume you've spoken with David," she continued, her voice low enough not to be overheard. "About Stephen's indiscretions. Financial and otherwise," I confirmed. "Yes." Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her water glass. And I'm handling it," I said simply. Her eyebrows rose. "Handling it how, exactly?" "In a way that protects the foundation, preserves what can be saved of the company, and doesn't unnecessarily destroy lives." Victoria studied me for a long moment. "Including Stephen's life? After what he did to you?" I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not interested in revenge, Victoria. That was your mother's specialty, not mine." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. "So what are you interested in?" "Doing the right thing," I said. "Which is why I wanted to tell you personally. I'm restructuring the foundation board. I'd like you to consider taking a position." Now I had genuinely shocked her. "Me? On the board? Why would you want that?" "Because, despite everything, you care about the foundation's work. You've attended every fundraiser, contributed to every campaign. And because you're still a Hayes, Victoria, that still means something." Her perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "I don't understand you." "Lauren, I've been horrible to you for years. Stephen betrayed you. Mother tormented you. You have every right to cut us all out." "Perhaps," I agreed. "But that wouldn't help anyone, least of all me. The foundation does good work. Work worth preserving. I think you can help me do that." Victoria looked away, her gaze sweeping across the room full of Dallas society figures who had once deferred to her mother and were now watching us with undisguised curiosity. "They're all waiting for us to implode," she said quietly. "The great Hayes family, finally getting its comeuppance. They'd love nothing more than to watch us tear each other apart." "I know," I replied. "We don't have to give them that satisfaction." Victoria turned back to me, her expression more genuine than I'd ever seen it. "You really aren't like her, are you? Mother would have used this opportunity to humiliate everyone who ever crossed her." "No," I said simply. "I'm not like her, and I don't want to be." Something shifted between us in that moment. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition. A potential for something that wasn't hostility. "I'll consider the board position," she said finally, "on one condition. Which is, you tell me what you're going to do about Stephen and the company. All of it. No secrets." I weighed my options carefully, then nodded. "Finish your lunch. Then we'll go somewhere private and I'll tell you everything." 3 hours later, Victoria and I sat in David Kaplan's office as I outlined my plan. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her expression shifting from skepticism to surprise to thoughtful consideration. "It could work," she admitted when I finished. "It's more generous than he deserves." "It's not about what he deserves," I explained. "It's about what's right for everyone involved. The employees, the foundation, the family name." David cleared his throat. "There's one more matter we need to address. The evidence Patricia collected. If we proceed with this plan, that evidence needs to be secured." "It will be," I assured him, "once everything is in place." Victoria looked between us. "You're really going to trust me with this? After everything?" "Trust is earned," I said carefully. "This is your opportunity to earn it back." As we left David's office, Victoria paused before we parted ways. "Lauren, thank you for not being what any of us expected." I smiled slightly. "I'm still figuring out who I am without all of your expectations." "Well," she said, surprising me with a small but genuine smile, "so far it's not terrible." Coming from Victoria Hayes, that was practically a declaration of sisterly love. The following week passed in a whirlwind of meetings, legal consultations, and careful planning. I moved through Patricia's world, now my world, with increasing confidence, making decisions that would shape the future of everything she had built. When the day finally came to confront Stephen, I was ready. We met in Patricia's study, neutral ground that was neither the home we had shared nor his new temporary apartment. He arrived looking more composed than the last time I'd seen him, though the strain of recent weeks showed in the new lines around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," I said formally, gesturing toward the chair across from me. "Did I have a choice?" he asked, though without real bitterness. "We always have choices, Stephen. That's something I've come to understand very clearly." He sat down heavily. "Victoria tells me you have a proposal, that you're not going to the authorities." "I have." "Conditions?" I said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Everything is outlined here. David has prepared the necessary documents." Stephen opened the folder and began reading, his expression shifting from wariness to disbelief. "This is generous. Unexpectedly so." The plan was straightforward. Stephen would resign as CEO of Hayes Technology, but retain a position on the board with limited powers. The embezzled funds would be returned through a structured repayment plan, disguised as a strategic reorganization to avoid public scandal. The company would implement new financial controls and transparency measures, and Stephen would agree to voluntary addiction counseling. The gambling problem he'd hidden from everyone had been the root of his financial desperation. "Why would you do this?" he asked, looking up from the documents. "After everything?" "Because destroying you wouldn't undo what's happened," I said truthfully. "And because despite everything, I did love you once. That has to count for something." Stephen's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I didn't deserve you. I never did." "No," I agreed gently. "You didn't. But that's not the point. This isn't about what any of us deserve. It's about what we choose to do now." He signed the documents without further protest, his signature as familiar to me as my own after 8 years of marriage. When he finished, he looked up at me with genuine regret in his eyes. "I am sorry, Lauren, for everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know. I believe you," I said, and found that I did. "Good luck, Stephen. I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for." After he left, I sat alone in Patricia's study for a long time. The portrait still seemed to watch me, those painted eyes following as I moved to the safe one last time. Inside was the evidence that could have destroyed Stephen, implicated Victoria, and brought down the company Patricia had built. I gathered everything, the documents, the USB drive, the photographs, and placed them in a small metal trash can. One by one, I burned them, watching as the proof of betrayal and deception curled into ash. It wasn't about protecting Stephen or Victoria. It was about freeing myself from the weight of Patricia's final manipulations, her carefully laid traps designed to test me even from beyond the grave. As the last photograph blackened and disintegrated, I felt something release inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. 1 year later, I stood on the steps of the newly renamed Hayes Foundation for Women's Education, watching as students filed into the building for the scholarship ceremony. The foundation had not only survived the careful restructuring of the family business, but had thrived, expanding its programs to serve women across Texas. Victoria approached, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in Patricia's lifetime. Her role on the board had evolved into a genuine passion, her talent for organization and detail finally channeled into something meaningful rather than social competition. "Full house," she noted with satisfaction. "The new mentorship program is a hit. Thanks to you," I acknowledged. "Your connections made it possible." She shrugged, though I could tell she was pleased by the recognition. "Mother would have hated this, you know. All these scholarship girls from community colleges mingling with Dallas society, the foundation being about substance instead of status." "Maybe," I said, "or maybe this is what she intended all along." Victoria considered this. "You still think that, don't you? That she had some grand master plan, that all her cruelty was somehow purposeful." "I think Patricia was complicated," I said carefully. "I think she built something valuable but couldn't separate its worth from her own need for control. And I think, in the end, she wanted that something to survive even if it meant changing." Victoria didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. Over the past year, we had developed an unexpected understanding. Not quite friendship, but a respectful collaboration built on our shared determination to salvage what was worth saving from Patricia's legacy. "Stephen called yesterday," she said, changing the subject. "He's completed his treatment program." "That's good to hear." I meant it sincerely. Our divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, a surprisingly amicable process given the circumstances. Stephen had moved to Houston, where he was working for a smaller tech company in a reduced capacity, humbled, but slowly rebuilding his life. "He asked about you," Victoria added. "Whether you're happy." The question gave me pause. Happiness had never been Patricia's goal. For any of us. Success, power, control. These were the values she had prized. The values she had tested and measured and manipulated to ensure her legacy continued. "I'm at peace," I said finally. "I'm building something that matters. That's enough." Victoria nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "The press is here. You should say a few words before the ceremony." As I approached the podium to address the gathered crowd, scholarship recipients, donors, board members, and local media, I caught sight of David Kaplan at the back of the room. He gave me a slight nod of approval, the same gesture Patricia had offered on the rare occasions when I had measured up to her impossible standards. "Welcome to the Hayes Foundation for Women's Education," I began, looking out at the faces before me. A year ago, I inherited a legacy that came with both privilege and responsibility. Today, I'm honored to share that legacy with each of you. The speech was brief but heartfelt, focusing on the Foundation's mission to provide educational opportunities for women from disadvantaged backgrounds. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of Patricia's expectations, the constant measurement, the unending tests, finally lifting from my shoulders. Later, as I mingled with scholarship recipients, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Hayes, I just wanted to say thank you. This scholarship is changing my life. I'm the first person in my family to go to college." Her earnest gratitude reminded me painfully of myself at her age. Hopeful, determined, unaware of how the world could harden that hope into something sharp and defensive. "You earned it," I told her sincerely. "And please, call me Lauren." That evening, I returned to the Hayes estate, my home now, redesigned over the past year to reflect my own taste rather than Patricia's formal, untouchable aesthetic. The grand rooms had been warmed with color, the imposing furniture replaced with pieces meant to be lived with rather than preserved. Patricia's portrait had been moved from the study to the family gallery, where it hung alongside generations of Hayes ancestors. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the terrace, watching as twilight settled over the gardens. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of laughter. The foundation was hosting a weekend retreat for scholarship, recipients on the estate grounds, another change that would have been unthinkable in Patricia's time. My phone chimed with a text from David. Patricia would be proud. Not that it matters anymore. I smiled at his perceptiveness. He was right. Patricia's approval, so desperately sought during her lifetime, had lost its power over me. Whatever her intentions had been in leaving me her fortune, her true legacy wasn't the money or the company or even the foundation. It was the lesson I had finally learned, that true worth came not from external validation, but from the choices we make when faced with power over others. Patricia had used her power to test, to control, to manipulate. I had chosen a different path. As darkness fell over the estate that had once been her kingdom, I thought about the eulogy I had delivered a year ago, the lies I had told about a woman whose cruelty had been deliberate and calculated. Perhaps they hadn't been complete lies after all. Patricia's methods had been brutal, but they had forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. Her tests had revealed a resilience that might have otherwise remained dormant, and her final manipulation, leaving everything to the daughter-in-law she had tormented, had ultimately freed me to become someone neither of us could have imagined. I raised my glass to the night sky, a silent acknowledgement of the complex woman who had shaped my life in ways both terrible and transformative. "Thank you," I whispered, not to Patricia's memory, but to my own enduring spirit, the part of me that had withstood every test, endured every humiliation, and emerged not hardened, but clarified. Like gold refined by fire, I had been tested by Patricia Hayes and found not wanting. The Hayes legacy would continue, but it would be written in my words now. The fortune Patricia had built through control would be sustained through compassion. The power she had wielded like a weapon would become a tool for change. And perhaps somewhere, in whatever afterlife existed for complicated, difficult women like Patricia Hayes, she was watching with that slight, approving nod, acknowledging that her final test had yielded results beyond even her calculating expectations. As I turned to go inside, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. No longer the uncertain young woman who had married into the Hayes family, nor the bitter matriarch Patricia had perhaps expected me to become. Just Lauren, finally comfortable in her own skin and the choices she had made. Patricia thought she was breaking me, but in the end she forged me. True strength isn't inherited, it's chosen. And I finally chose myself.